I'm alive. I shouldn't be.
He should not be alive. This is unfucking believable.
From the heart of trucker America, my boy Reed Coverdale, host of the Naturalist, Capitalist.
This is what government does. It sucks.
If you think you're going to win people over by stating commonplaces, you're just selling the other part.
It is about dictating every transaction that you have for the rest of your life.
Mr. Potato Head.
Coverdale is the guy to be president of the United States.
You intimidated me with your perfect 70s porn star.
That was the beginning of my problems.
He died doing what he loved, chasing a minor.
But I'll put a 50 cal attached to my Suburban.
Libertarians need to get out of New York.
The gulag is going to be in your house.
This guy's a fucking murderer. He deserves to be in a
dungeon. Gotta get him out of that truck at night and get him into the White House.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Naturalist Capitalist. As always, I'm trying to push you guys to my other platforms. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can also watch it on Odyssey, and you can listen to it in audio format on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and a few other smaller platforms. Go to my link tree. You can follow me on all those platforms and make sure you're keeping up to date with what I'm doing. But tonight I got a good guest. We've got Dave Decamp, who I'm sure many of you already know. He is the news editor for antiwar.com, and he knows a lot about what's going on in Ukraine right now. How you doing tonight, Dave?
I'm good, Reed. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So when Scott Horton was in Utah like a month ago, hanging out with me, he took some phone calls where he was talking to you to find out what was going on, and I was texting you at the same time on Twitter trying to figure out what was going on. So you seem to be someone who is kind of in sync with what's happening there. So how do you keep up with the news? What types of sources do you use to know what's actually taking place and not what the media is lying to us about?
Yeah, so I mean, what I do now for a living full time is I, follow the news for antiwar.com, and I write kind of short articles about it, just about every day, to try to help keep people informed. But, a big part of my job is kind of sifting through all the propaganda. And, most of what I use is mainstream sources, AP, Reuters, places like that, because the truth is in there. You just kind of got to find it. And New York Times, Washington Post, a lot of times in like a New York Times article, buried in the story will be like a pretty serious kind of scoop that they kind of bury for some reason. I guess there's certain things that they don't want to put out there too much. And when it comes to Ukraine right now, it's really hard to know what's going on the ground with the fighting. So I've been more focusing on kind of the political side, the U.S. reaction to it, just because it's so dynamic, and of course, Ukraine has every motive to kind of exaggerate things and put out false information because they want the U.S. and NATO to intervene. And then Russia has their own motives. They might want to downplay casualties. So it's pretty tough. And we kind of just run the short, like I said, Reuters. I mean, you'll find a lot of crap in Reuters, but they have a news wire, and they'll just put out, an article that's a few sentences, and it just says, the mayor of this city said this many people died or that. So we kind of just post that stuff. We link to tons of stuff. If you look at the front page, antiwar.com, it's just tons of links, and the top news section is stuff usually I've written, me and Jason Ditz. What I write is the things that we think are the most important, and I can kind of add the more important context that's missing from the mainstream articles. And sometimes I editorialize them more. Other times I really don't put my opinion into them at all, and I try to make it digestible and like headline, subhead, and the first paragraph. Just because, that's what people want, especially these days. It's, shorter, the better, I think. But when I'm writing about certain issues, like, let's say, like the Iran deal, for example, the mainstream coverage of Iran and Israel in general, like that relationship, that dynamic, and Iran's nuclear program is just such nonsense. So in those articles, there might be a little more kind of not opinion, but just context, just filling people in that, might not be a regular reader, happens to come across the article, and like just certain facts, like the fact that Israel has a secret nuclear weapons program and Iran doesn't. Like, so few Americans know that. And when I kind of started this journey that ended with me writing for antiwar.com, it was learning those things that really opened me up to so much when you start kind of questioning the narrative and realizing how much is just nonsense that they put in the context, and how they just, want you to forget about history when something hits the news. And Russia and Ukraine is a perfect example of that.
Yeah. So something pretty much all of us got wrong. Douglas McGregor, Daniel McAdams, Scott Horton, you, me, not that I'm a reputable source on this type of stuff yet, but none of us thought that Russia was actually going to really invade Ukraine. So do you think that those rumblings that we were hearing back in November and December, that they were accurate, or do you think they were wrong back then, and then Russia decided kind of last minute, okay, we have to do this because they're shelling Donbass and they're not taking us seriously enough? Were those like actual intelligence, bits that we were hearing months ago, or was that propaganda bullshit from the State Department and the CIA?
Well, first, I would say McGregor was right, because I remember a few days before it happened. I don't know about the whole time in the lead up, but I remember like a week before it happened, he was on, I think it was Sky News, and he's like, "Yeah, Russia's invading," and I was like, "Oh."
Okay.
But during November, December, I think, there was just like a deluge of just a bunch of what I think was, bullshit stories from the U.S. about all this intelligence that they had, saying that an invasion was imminent. But there was definitely some truth in there that Russia was kind of building up and positioning its forces in a way that it could assault Ukraine the way that it did. But it wasn't really until later in January that it did become more into like positioning to actually move into Ukraine. In November, December, they're kind of building up in bases that were still like 100 miles from the border, or in Crimea, on the Black Sea. But I think that, the U.S. had the opportunity to stop it if they took the negotiations seriously. And you mentioned the Donbass. One thing I always said, even when I was downplaying the threat of the invasion, was like a flare up in the Donbass could always happen. And Russia was saying, they say that Ukraine was planning like this big offensive there. It's tough to know if that's true, but the shelling did really increase in the week before Russia invaded. Putin was saying a big part of the reason why he decided to go in was because Zelensky said that he was going to, try to get nuclear weapons. And there actually was some reporting. Oh man, I wish I could remember who wrote it. I think it was in the Intercept, and it was an author that I don't think is very reputable these days. But it was a report that said that the CIA, like U.S. intelligence, was actually surprised when he finally did it. And I was surprised too when he declared, the independence of the Donetsk and Luhansk republics in the Donbass. That's when I was like, okay, this is even then I still thought it was kind of a last minute push for a ceasefire or a fulfillment of the Minsk Accords, which were the agreements that they made in 2014 and 2015 to end the war there in the Donbass. It's been going on for 8 years. But then he kind of went right in after that. So it seemed like it was sudden to me. And I think it was also even sudden how quick it happened just like that day. I think it did kind of catch the U.S. by surprise. But it was a mix. I think there was definitely some truth. Another reason why, I was naive. I thought that Biden, was kind of winking to Russia, or maybe making some more backdoor deals that we didn't know about. Like, but they didn't, obviously, because if they couldn't promise that Ukraine would never join NATO, then they weren't entertaining Russia's concerns at all, because Biden said publicly, they're in this run-up that they're not joining anytime soon. Zelensky said that he asked NATO, are we going to join? And they said no, but publicly the door is going to remain open. I mean, that just tells you so much. And now, I think that they did want Russia to invade so they could put all these sanctions on and kind of officially start this new Cold War with Russia. We've been calling it a new Cold War for years now, but now it's kind of official. And I think another example of them wanting this is the fact that Blinken hasn't gotten on the phone with Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, since the invasion started. I mean, that's if they really cared, they would be exploring every possible avenue to end the fighting, at least talking to them, and that was another reason why I didn't think that the invasion would happen like that, because they actually were in pretty intense negotiations leading up to it. So, but then Blinken called off his last meeting with Lavrov after Putin recognized the Donbass, and then Putin invaded, and they haven't talked since. So I think that says a lot.
Yeah. What I find kind of ironic is because people like us are trying to explain why this situation has gotten to where it is, a lot of people will say, oh, you're justifying this, or you're glad that this happened. That's the one that's really funny, because I don't know about you, but the night that Putin started the invasion, after he had just gone into Luhansk and Donetsk, like when he started pushing further west, obviously I felt horrible for the people who were getting killed. But on top of that, I thought, like, oh God, here goes all the anti-war sentiment we've been building up. Like, all this bullshit about COVID that they've been saying for the last 2 years, the disaster that Afghanistan was, like, this is all a perfect lead up. Like, even Candace Owens was tweeting out, like, this propaganda that Russia's going to invade Ukraine is a complete lie. They're making this all up. And it was just all perfect. It would have been amazing to see nothing happen and everyone go like, oh my God, this was all just a lie. Why do we believe anything they say? So for him to go in, it was actually the complete opposite on multiple levels of what I would want. Because first of all, people are dying. But then on top of that, it kind of makes our narrative harder to defend. Like we have to actually be like, well, no, we wish he hadn't done this, but this is why he did it. Where if it hadn't happened at all, it would have been just a perfect picture of how much the State Department and the media lies about foreign interventions. Do you agree with that? Or
yeah, it would have been a huge blow to the whole national security state, and that was another reason why I thought that they weren't going to do it, because they really had the upper hand in the information war there, and they were really mocking, because there was like reports that gave specific dates, and they were and the Russian officials were really mocking those reports. But yeah, and then like you said about the anti-war sentiment, and it is really frustrating. It's something I also have to kind of be like a little more patient about, because people see me, I write for antiwar.com, and I'm just talking about how the U.S. should not send Ukraine weapons, and how they should be trying to make a deal with Putin. And then they say, oh, I thought you're anti-war, you can't condemn Russia. It's like, with people that know me, there's no need to do that. It's like, of course, I think war is the worst thing. That's why I do what I do. And it's, horrific what's going on there. But when you really follow this stuff, and what the U.S. is and its allies are doing, across the world, it's like, it just seems silly to, have to, say these things to kind of appease these people. But I could see from an outsider's perspective, they just started paying attention to Ukraine now. But yeah, and there is some pretty good anti-war sentiment, I think, on the right now. Even like you mentioned, Candace Owens, I think she's been really good on.
Isn't that incredible to watch? Like, I don't know what happened to her, but she's been better than a lot of libertarians. It's been kind of embarrassing.
it is embarrassing. There's definitely issues with the kind of the populist right on China and stuff, but I have been impressed with like Tucker's show. I mean, I watch it, and they're not just saying, no, let's not get involved. There's, he has guys on there saying Biden should be on the phone right now. They should be promising that Ukraine won't join NATO. Like, they're calling for diplomacy. It's really incredible to see. So I think that's pretty good. Then on the other hand, you have people protesting for World War III, basically, for the U.S. and NATO to enforce a no-fly zone. I think there's been marches for that, in some cities in the U.S. And they're small, from what I understand, but that's pretty alarming. So I think we kind of have to explain to people, your friends and family that don't pay attention to this stuff, that a no-fly zone means war with Russia, which could mean nuclear war and the end of the world. So we can't, under any circumstances, do that. And they kind of try to dress it up. You have, people like Adam Kinzinger who have been kind of calling for this no-fly zone from the start. I mean, they should be, shamed and ostracized from society for having that viewpoint. But unfortunately, it's like it's way more prevalent than it should be. And even just the idea of being aggressive and hostile with Russia, it's very popular right now in the U.S. There's all these polls that they think Biden should be tougher, more sanctions. When the sanctions, they're not doing anything to stop the war. They're not hurting Putin at all. Just today, I saw that his approval rating is up to 83% from 69% back in January before the war. And you see the White House, they put out these statements bragging about how they're destroying Russia's economy. Like, imagine you're in Russia and you say, like, you just have to put the shoe on the other foot. If Russia had the power to destroy our economy, and the Kremlin, and they did it, and the Kremlin was putting out statements bragging about it, what would you turn on your leader, or would you rally around them? Maybe not so much us, but a lot of people, I think, would.
Yeah. So with Crimea in 2014, correct me if I get my timeline wrong here, but there was the coup, and then they tried to kick the Russians out of the base in Sevastopol, and then the Russians basically just said "fuck you," and the Ukrainians just left Crimea. There wasn't even really a fight. No one was killed. They just left. And then after that, Crimea voted to join Russia. Like 97% is the official number. And then soon after that, Luhansk and Donetsk also voted to join Russia, and Putin denied it. He said, nope, we don't want you. And then after that was the Minsk II agreement. Is that all correct?
Yeah.
Okay. How accurate do you think those numbers are that they report for the people wanting to be part of Russia? How much does Russia have its finger on the scale there, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say, but I know that there's been a ton of polling before the Crimea referendum and after that says, overwhelmingly, before it, that people wanted to join Russia. And that, number I remember seeing like 68%, low 70s. And then after the ousting of Yanukovych, it would make sense for that number to go up, but like 96% is really high. But it's tough to say, but there's been polls since that, people are happy there, that, that they all seem pretty happy that they're part of Russia. And it really does go to show that there wasn't like a shot fired in that, annexation that I think that says a lot.
Right. So I was reading on antiwar.com today that Blinken is saying that he doesn't think Russia is serious about having talks or negotiating. From your point of view, who is willing to talk and who isn't? Is no one willing to talk? Is Putin really like saying, hey, let's have a discussion and we can end this thing? Is there no really fair side here? What's going on?
Well, there's been pretty intense negotiations between Russia and Ukraine pretty much since the invasion started. Now, yesterday was kind of a big deal that Ukrainian and Russian officials met in Turkey, and Ukraine put forward like a potential peace deal, a proposal for a potential peace deal. And they said that they wouldn't join NATO. They would vow not to join NATO. That's the first bullet point in any report you read. And people try to tell you that this isn't about NATO, but that's the main thing. So they say that they wouldn't join NATO or any other military alliance. In exchange, though, this is where it's kind of tricky. They want security guarantees, and the Ukrainian officials describe them as like Article 5 guarantees, which Article 5 is the clause of like NATO's treaty that outlines mutual defense. An attack on one of them is attack on all of them. and they want guarantees from, the U.S. and several other NATO countries as well as Israel, and Russia, says that they have to be a guarantor as well. So I think it's really hard to believe that Russia would accept that. But and then there's other issues. Ukraine also said they would vow never to develop nuclear weapons. They said that they with the military exercises, because one of Russia's demands was for them to demilitarize, but that wasn't really outlined in this proposal. But they said that they would only be able to do military exercises with the approval of the people giving them the security guarantees, which Russia would be one of them. So Russia mentioned that. And then there's the kind of the big ones is Crimea and the Donbass republics. Russia wants Ukraine to give up to recognize Crimea as Russian territory, which they don't. They say that they're going to get it back, and they want them to recognize the independence of the Donbass republics, which is pretty much de facto annexation by Russia, because they would be protected by Russia. And that wasn't in the proposal. And they say Zelensky and Putin they'll talk about that. Actually, no, Ukraine said that with the issue of Crimea, and I think this is interesting, that they want to resolve it in a 15-year timeline, which is pretty long. But I think for Zelensky, for him, it would be a big political hit for him to give up Crimea and the Donbass. So I think that's part of it.
So I saw that they were saying that Russia was saying they're even okay with Ukraine joining the European Union as long as they don't join NATO. Is that true? Is that something they were actually discussing?
So that was a report in the Financial Times. And then in the proposal that Ukraine gave to Russia, it did say that they would renounce NATO, their plans to join NATO, but they could still join the EU. And I haven't seen any Russian comments kind of against that plan. But from what I understand in Russian media and stuff, they're saying that nobody's really taking this Ukrainian offer seriously, I think, because of the security guarantees that they want. But the head of Russia's, delegation heading the negotiations, he had some pretty positive things to say about it today. The Kremlin, a spokesman for Putin, he said that, there's no breakthroughs and nothing's really promising right now. It's still a long way to go. But, either way, they're talking. And I think Russia is serious about the talks. But I also think that they're serious about, destroying the Azov battalion and kind of the people that have been fighting this war in the Donbass for the past 8 years. The denazification, which it wasn't mentioned in the deal. And apparently, according to the Financial Times, isn't really part of the potential agreement that could happen. So I think they're going to take that on, themselves. And then, it's tough to know what that means exactly. If that means everybody in Ukraine that's considered far right, which kind of has lost its meaning, does Russia consider them all Nazis, or is it just kind of the openly neo-Nazi ones? So
right, if they went into the Capitol on January 6th, then they're neo-Nazis.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
The qualifier. So yeah, speaking of the moderate Nazis in Ukraine, what do you think that they're exaggerated a little bit, or do you think that they are a legitimate presence in the National Guard and that they have held power in the government? And I saw even in some local government elections, they won like 20 seats for mayor. The Svoboda party did. And so it doesn't seem like they're just a joke. It seems like they are actually a presence. But what's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I understand it, is that they are a real political force in the country. And to the extent, exactly how influential they are, I just don't know enough about Ukrainian politics really to say. But, there's no doubt that they, exist. And it's really funny, we're seeing there's all this kind of rehabilitation for the Azov battalion. They're kind of the most infamous one because they're an openly Nazi militia that joined Ukraine's National Guard that the New York Times used to describe as neo-Nazi, and now they describe as far right. And there's an article in CNN. I think there's something in the Times, the British paper, kind of saying the same thing. Like, oh yeah, they used to be Nazis. It's very Syrian moderate rebels. But I do think Putin exaggerates it. But again, I just don't really know enough about it to say, because then I know a lot of people who, a lot of times when I start kind of researching it more, I'm always like surprised at how many Nazis there really are in Ukraine and how influential they actually are. Because, there are, you mentioned Svoboda and, the right sector, Azov, and, there was an interview, I think it was PBS, they're interviewing the mayor of one of the towns in the east there, and he had a picture of Bandera behind him. But it's the history of the country. It's that there's a lot of people have been killed in Ukraine by by Nazis and communists, and so they all have their own reasons for what they do there.
Yeah, if anyone watching this hasn't found out about Stepan Bandera, just go Google him, and there's plenty of information. The funny thing, and Mykola Lebed, all these people from Ukraine in the 30s and 40s, you can find out about them. You just don't know their names because you almost never hear about them. But if you go look them up, there's plenty of information on them. Responsible for the deaths of like tens of thousands of Jews in Ukraine, fought with the SS against the Russians. I think Bandera was actually eventually arrested by the Gestapo because he fought with the Nazis against the Russians, but then he was a nationalist who didn't want to become part of Nazi Germany, so they ended up throwing him in jail. But as far as the anti-Semitic, like violent, vile behavior of the Nazis, that didn't bother him at all. And then Mykola Lebed, I had Adam Fitzgerald on my show. He was telling me about him. He was employed by the SS after they invaded Ukraine, and then after Germany lost World War II, he was hired by the CIA. So tons of interesting stuff if you look into the neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine and how they've been funded by the CIA and used by them since the end of World War II. It's kind of mind-boggling. So what is your best case scenario for how this could end going forward? From a realistic standpoint, like what do you think both sides would be willing to accept at this point? Would Putin be willing to budge at all? Would Zelensky be willing to budge at all? What do you think this could look like?
I think Putin's going to finish what he's doing in the Donbass, at least. I don't see them stopping that offensive at this point. And it is kind of, as these things go on, there's Ukraine's going to have to concede more. Like under the Minsk agreements, Donbass would have remained part of Ukraine. They would have had a certain level of autonomy, but if they just fulfilled those agreements, they wouldn't have lost that territory. So now, I mean, the Donbass is totally gone. And then, so when that's done, which I'm not sure how long that's going to take. I'm not a military analyst, and it's tough for me to figure out exactly what's going on the ground. But Mariupol, which was like the major Azov holdout there, appears to be pretty much taken over by Russia. Not totally, but so that could still take some time. But I think Zelensky, it's tough to say because who knows really who's kind of directing him, like what his real interests are here, because it seems like, it's not Ukraine. What's good for Ukraine doesn't seem to be what's driving him. It seems more his political motivations, because I think, there was a real chance to stop this, like I said, and that's not just on Biden, that's also on the Ukrainians and Zelensky, the leadership there. So I would say best case scenario, Russia takes the Donbass. Ukraine agrees to not join NATO and be neutral militarily. And then they work out some kind of maybe bullshit deal about Crimea and Donbass that to kick the can down the road there. And the security guarantees, the thing is, with those security guarantees that they want, they're going to need some level of cooperation between the U.S. and Russia. So I think that, and I don't see that happening because I don't think there's any turning back from what Biden has done here with the sanctions. I think we've really entered a new era here where, I just can't imagine, military cooperation with Russia. I mean, unless some Donald Trump or, some other right-wing populist comes in and reverses this Russia policy, even though I can't see Trump doing that because he rolled over for just about everything he said he would do. Yeah. But unless it really just depends, I think, on politics here. Like if that's enough of a political force here, but then you look at Congress and it's really just a few people. So I don't know. I like best case scenario, Putin takes Donbass, they work out a ceasefire, and things will probably still be pretty hairy for a while, though. I think there's always, it's going to kind of be maybe another frozen conflict.
So I asked Scott Wharton this. I want to hear your answer. Why did Russia suddenly become the bad guy to the Democrats? Because it wasn't always that way. I mean, it used to be the opposite. Like the Republicans were the Russia hawks. And I remember Obama even arguing with Romney about that in the 2012 debates. And then with Syria and with Ukraine, Russia is this horrible, awful boogeyman backing all this stuff that we have to put a stop to. And if you side with Assad or you side with Putin, you're just the devil. So why Russia? Like, what was that? Just what the State Department wanted, and so they somehow implemented it into the Democratic Party somehow, or what? What triggered that sudden phobia?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say because it started before Russia intervened in Syria, because I think them stopping their regime change operation in Syria was a big one that really made a lot of the Democrats, a lot of the people in the Obama administration really hate Russia. And the coup in Ukraine was before that. And I know like Clinton, she didn't like Putin for years before that. She was always kind of talking shit about him. So, it's really, to me, it's about empire. It's about world domination. These people want to control the world, and kind of they've adopted the neocon doctrine that led to all the post 9/11 wars. And a big part of that is just, global hegemony. And, even though Russia's not a threat to the U.S. homeland at all, I guess they want more influence on their borders and in other regions nearby than the U.S. wants. I mean, that's what it seems like to me, and that the Democrats, the mainstream Democrats, are just, neocons.
Yeah. So do you have hope that the right is going to maintain any of this anti-war trajectory that they've begun to embrace? I mean, like you said, they still suck on China. I mean, I could just see, President DeSantis and China decides to get feisty with Taiwan, and I just see all of that anti-war sentiment evaporating. Do you think that I'm too pessimistic, or do you share the same fear?
I mean, I could see that. The China thing is a big one, but I hope that they can learn a lesson about Taiwan with Ukraine right now, because just the way things are in this country with inflation and gas prices, and we're just recovering from the lockdowns. Like, how can we possibly care or worry about what the hell's going on in Ukraine? And Taiwan, they'll say, oh, they make they make chips there, they make semiconductors. We can't. That's why they're more important. But most of the shit we buy is in China anyway, so we trade with them. And I know that's kind of a big thing on the right, the populist right, is that they want to decouple from China. But you can't really address that issue without recognizing that there is like a U.S. military buildup near China, going on right now and ramping up. It started really under Obama, ramped up under Trump, and is increasing even more under Biden. The Pentagon just released their new national defense strategy, and it identified China as the top threat facing the U.S.
Yeah.
So, that's pretty big because the national defense strategies come out every few years. The last one was in 2018, and it kind of outlined the shift from counterterrorism in the Middle East, called great power competition with Russia and China, and it put Russia and China on like an equal footing. And now that even with all this Ukraine stuff, I mean, this was a year in the making, this national defense strategy, but there's been stuff going on with Russia all year. It's not like it was just started with the invasion, but even with all this Russia stuff, they're saying China, and you saw Biden, he signed a military deal last year with Australia and the UK that's aimed at China. Australia is going to get nuclear powered submarines out of the deal. He's increasing cooperation with the Quad, which is the US, Japan, India, and Australia, which a lot of like hawks see that as kind of a foundation for a NATO style alliance. So I hope that some people on the populist right can see, what's happening here. And that if we do decouple with China, then we're going to go to war with China, or we're going to end up in a situation similar to how we are with Russia that just will really be against, our interests as Americans, as just regular people in America who don't care about controlling the entire world. I mean, you see this hypocrisy kind of with Tucker, where he's like, in one segment, why do we care about Ukraine? We're not talking about shipping lanes in the South China Sea. It's like, he slips it in. But, so hopefully a lesson is learned. But at the same time, a big, Steve Bannon, who's like the guy on that side, he's one of the biggest China hawks there is. He's openly called for regime change in Beijing. So, and as kind of a libertarian, I think that their arguments are pretty counter to what we believe, even though, right now I can definitely sympathize a lot with the populist right. And out of every political force in the U.S., they're the ones I tend to be agreeing with the most right now, between lockdowns and the wars that are happening right now. Where was I going with that? But they really try to blame everything on China. Our jobs getting shipped overseas. That's why everybody has, that's why Americans don't have as good jobs now, don't make as much money. But that is a symptom of the Federal Reserve and not having a currency that's backed by gold or another commodity, and inflation. That's not because they took our jobs. It's because there's plenty of jobs right now. The issue is people aren't making enough money, and that's because their money isn't worth shit. But I
got a good question along this line. So it's gonna be a two-part. So first part is, I've been hearing rumors that Russia is actually pegging the ruble to gold. Is that true, or is that just a rumor?
Not really. I know that they've bought a lot of gold. They've been buying a lot of gold for years now, I think, in preparation for sanctions since the Crimea stuff. But it's not like really backed by gold. But the ruble has kind of bounced back from the crash that it took. They've taken a lot of countermeasures. But I don't know for sure. But from what I understand, it's not backed by gold right now.
All right. My other question was, so Saudi Arabia, they're cozying up to China. They've been having talks with China about pricing oil in yens instead of dollars. Also, there were some documents that were just released tying Saudi Arabia even more, obviously, with Flight 77 that hit the Pentagon on 9/11. Joe Biden hasn't ended support for the genocide in Yemen, but he's talked badly about it. And so those relations seem to be shaky, and I'm happy about that personally. I mean, I realize a lot of people are going to suffer economic consequences if that alliance falls apart, but I mean, the price we're paying for that is pretty ridiculous. We're murdering hundreds of thousands of people. So do you think that the mainstream opinion of Saudi Arabia could finally go down the toilet in the United States? Do you think finally they're going to be like, all right, fuck these people. We don't want to be supporting this regime anymore, especially because the right seems to have been the force that has been more pro Saudi Arabia, at least in the past. And if Saudi Arabia is getting friendlier with China, and if it hopefully becomes more mainstream about the connections between Saudi Arabia and the hijackers, I don't know, maybe people will finally be like, okay, fine, we're done with these people. Do you think there's any hope for that at this point? Or
I don't know, because Blinken was actually just in the Middle East. He met with, the Saudi, UAE foreign ministers, and they're mad at the Biden administration for this, not backing them as much as they would like in Yemen, even though they are still backing them. But they're not just giving them everything that they want. But there's reports that came out today that said that they've been reassured and that they're happy now. And I think that's the talks with China maybe was kind of their way to get what they want out of the Biden administration. And there was a report in the Wall Street Journal that they declined calls from Biden. So, I mean,
so that was just a power move on their part. Like, oh, you don't want to support us? Well, guess what? And so then we just caved like we always do.
Yeah. But interestingly, the Saudis, they announced a ceasefire in Yemen today or yesterday during talks in Yemen on the war, where not talks in Yemen, talks in Saudi Arabia that they just had on the war. The Houthis weren't there, but they said that they were announcing a ceasefire. The Houthis said that they rejected it because they need to lift the blockade too. But the Houthis also announced a ceasefire. So there's an overlapping day. So there might be a chance of that they're going to try to work something out. But if not, then I think that they're going to get a lot more support out of the Biden administration. And you talk about the 9/11 stuff that just came out. I mean, nobody even noticed that. I saw so few people. Yeah.
Yeah.
I missed it. I was a week late on that. I didn't even
Yeah, so you don't have an email feed from a bunch of 9/11 truthers, so
I don't know.
Yeah, you're lucky.
Yeah. But I saw I need to kind of dive more into that stuff too. I've seen the interview Adam Fitzgerald and watched his stuff. He seems like he really knows what he's talking about, and he's not like a kook.
Right.
So yeah, I should really watch more of his videos. But anyway, because we were just so overflown. I mean, we have a database where I put all the news articles. I just copy, drag links all day, kind of, and it's just been flooded, hundreds and hundreds of articles that we sort through. So yeah, we were kind of pissed at ourselves for missing that, but we ran it as a top news story for a day or for a whole weekend. But yeah, nobody noticed it. Nobody cares. I mean, even if we found out, that's what's so pathetic kind of about this country, is that we could learn that Bush did 9/11 tomorrow and what would happen.
Yeah, right.
But the Saudis, I think the time for them to be a real pariah has kind of passed, and it's a lot of it is Trump's fault. When they killed Khashoggi, that was the moment. That was the moment when everybody said, "Hey, what the hell are we doing? Supporting these people?" Even though you could kill hundreds of thousands of children in Yemen, and nobody notices because the news doesn't cover it. But Khashoggi, there was something about it, probably because he wrote for the Washington Post. And Trump was kind of had the opportunity to do it, and he didn't do it. And they passed the bill to end the war in Yemen, and he vetoed it. So to me, it kind of seems like that moment passed. I mean, you saw Stephen Colbert had this joke where he's like, "Oh, we'll get our oil from the good guys in Saudi Arabia." It's so is that a joke? Are you being serious?
Yeah, that was so. I talked about this with a guy I had on my show a few weeks ago. It was so weird watching that, because to me that was an obvious joke at first. We'll get it from the good guys, Saudi Arabia. Obvious sarcasm. And then in the same sentence, he's like, "But I'm willing to have a clean conscience and pay a little more at the pump." But it's wait, did you just blatantly point out the hypocrisy in this and then just go along with it at the same time? Are we really this stupid now that we can't even pick up on such a coin flip like that. I mean, it's just, I don't know, man, we're in trouble.
Yeah. And I think I've seen some right wingers kind of talking about Yemen now that, ignored it for 4 years. And that's another thing about partisan politics. Like all these right wingers that are good on this right now could flip pretty quick if their side, was kind of for it. It is kind of sad to see how quick that those changes could happen because, and even, again, that populist right, they're all pretty bad on Iran too.
Mm-hmm.
I bet if Biden went to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal that they would all call him a terrorist or something. And, they all are pretty bad on Israel for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're not really better than the left. It's just that the wars that are front and center right now, they're better on. It seems like it's that way. Like they don't care about Palestine. They don't care about Yemen. They don't care about Iran. They don't care about, I mean, they're super hawkish on China. So if the main theater became China, or we actually tried regime change in Iran, then you'd probably suddenly be like, okay, the left is actually a little bit better. It's just like, it just depends on the year and what president is pushing what war. And you kind of just have to go with the flow and just adjust as the time goes on, it seems.
Yeah, that's something I'm seeing. I mean, I've been working for antiwar.com. I've been writing for them not that long. I started in like 2019, and I've been doing it full time for like a year and a half. And just in that time, I see people like, get stoked on like, right now it's the populist right. Before, during Trump, when there was a real push to end the war in Yemen, it was more like not just like leftists, like anti-imperialist leftists that are always good on this stuff. Like, I mean, kind of the more liberal left and like Ro Khanna, and I was like kind of stoked on them. And now they're all hard. Ro Khanna has been so bad on this Russia stuff. And, I know Eric Garris, who, runs antiwar.com. He founded it in 95 with Justin Raimondo. Raimondo gets all the credit because he was a genius writer, but Eric, runs the site, and he's been doing it so long. And it's just, he's so used to, and I'm getting used to it too, like not really caring. Like if people are good on war or the issue at the time, I don't really care about the other stuff. Like I'm pretty good at, I'll talk to anybody that left this right winger, whatever. And that's kind of what you got to do, where you'll just go crazy because you'll find reasons not to like anybody. But when it comes to politics, I mean, I'm not involved in politics at all. So I don't know. I voted for the first time in years for the Virginia governor election. I voted for Glenn Youngkin, even though I don't like him at all. But they were running that other guy who was like a Clintonian Democrat. And after the lockdowns, I just wanted to go say, fuck you, the Democrats. And I just voted Republican, even though like I've always hated Republicans. I mean, I was in high school during the Bush years. Like it's like in my bones to hate Republicans, but just, I just wanted to say fuck you to the Democrats. But I'm not like politically active at all. And I can't find any movement. I've never been able to find a candidate or a movement that I got like excited about. Even though I do like, I pay attention. I follow because Twitter is horrible. I do follow like the LP drama sometimes in some ways, and I do like. Yeah, it's so horrible, but it makes
it's terrible, dude.
It makes me stay away too. But I do really like Dave Smith. Like when I see his speeches, I'm like, damn, he actually knows what the fuck he's talking about.
Yeah, dude, I've been a libertarian for, I would say like 7 years now. And I made a really pragmatic choice to support Tulsi in 2020. And the funny thing about that campaign was you had like former Trump supporters, former Hillary supporters, former Bernie supporters, former Ron Paul supporters. You had everybody. And they somehow all got along because they're like, you know what? We support this woman and her general message of ending the regime change wars, bringing the troops home, and focusing on our own problems. So after that campaign, I decided to like entertain the Libertarian Party again. And I remember I heard Jacob Hornberger speaking, and I was just like, oh, this is amazing. Like I agree with everything this guy is saying. And I was like, I'm going to be with a party again that agrees with everything I say. This is going to be so easy because we all agree on everything. Unlike that Tulsi campaign where we all had different views on guns and abortion and climate change or whatever. Like, this is going to be so easy. And then, man, it's such a shit show. Like, people agree on 99% of the stuff, but then that 1% they can find, they'll eviscerate each other over it. It's mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, I think Twitter, I mean, Twitter's good for a lot of reasons, but it's really bad for a lot of reasons because, back in the day, you would go to a convention every few months, see each other, talk, and then that's it. But now, like every stupid idea you have, you tweet it out and somebody gets mad about it. And it's just so bad for like
the And then discourse. You have thought leaders debating about like private playground theory or whatever. It's just like,
yeah.
Jesus Christ. Like, well, important stuff is going on and we get... Yeah, I don't know. But that seems to be the problem. I mean, I admire people like you who don't get involved in politics. You just talk about the issues because it seems like the current goal of the Mises Caucus and what Dave and Scott are trying to do is like inject what you're doing into politics, like bring the pure message into politics. And I'm all on board with it. I'm supporting it. I am skeptical it'll work though, because it seems like that's how you kill a movement is by creating a party or, a political cause behind it. That seems like everything that's good, it becomes corrupted that way. So I'm interested to see how it turns out. I don't know. I'm hopeful, but who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. I always think about joining like, through the Mises Caucus and stuff, but I never have. I should check out kind of local, see if there's a good people in Virginia involved in it. Because it would be good because I am pretty like cynical. So it would even just going and talking to people that, care about what I have to say would be nice, I think, and get me out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, it's funny. I wasn't a libertarian until like a few years ago. I didn't consider myself one. I thought I was a leftist for a while, and it was really just because this was the issue I cared about, and I got into this through like listening to Abby Martin and people like that, and kind of learning about the issue of Palestine and Israel. Yeah. And
she's a great one to listen to.
Yeah, sent me down the rabbit hole, and then when I started writing for antiwar.com. I always liked Ron Paul. Like back in the day, I read End the Fed, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. But I always just thought I had just the wrong idea of what libertarians were. And then, talking to Scott and Eric, and I read some Rothbard, and I was like, oh, this is great. This is it. And then, I thought I would get politically active within the space, but then it just seems too toxic for me. But I think, a lot of that is just online, and I probably should try to, do some stuff.
Yeah, I've always felt positive coming away from an actual get-together. Like, it's so much better than Twitter. Twitter is just a hellhole. We should send Twitter to Ukraine to fight and let it get blown up because it sucks.
Yeah.
But, yeah, man, where can people keep up with your work and what you're doing? Because I love reading your stuff on Twitter. I read your articles on antiwar.com. I really like your approach. You seem like really calm and cool-headed and nonpartisan. So I like it. Where can everyone who's listening and watching keep up with it?
Yeah, antiwar.com. If you see the top news section, you'll see a bunch of articles by me there and Jason Ditz. And we've been running stuff from Kyle Anzalone and Will Porter at the Libertarian Institute. So they've been making my life a little easier. It's less writing for me. And I'm on Twitter at Decamp Dave. And that's it. That's what I'm focusing on.
All right, man. Well, just for closing, what is the one thing that people should know is wrong about what they're hearing about Ukraine? If there's just one thing you want to turn on its head and tell people, no, this is a complete lie, what's the most important thing?
That the U.S. cares about Ukrainians. I think that I think that's it. They don't care. They want they're using Ukrainians to fight Russia right now, and they're flooding that country with weapons, billions of dollars worth of weapons, and just in the past month, to fight a battle that they're not going to win unless it's a long, bloody insurgency for years and years and maybe even decades and decades. It's the only way this could be a defeat for Russia, which is what Blinken says he thinks will happen, which he tells you enough. They don't care about Ukraine. They just want to bleed Russia, and they're liars and they're evil.
All right, there you go. Everyone go follow Dave. Go follow antiwar.com. I will have those links in the description so you don't have to search for it. Dave, let's do this again. I enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, Reed, it was a good time. Thanks for having me.